Current extreme poverty has many causes, one of which is debt. Debt leads a nation to become dependent and vulnerable to external nations and monetary organisations. While the dire state of the economy stimulates hunger, homelessness, illness and suffering of the population. Today I'm going to explain how the 1980s debt crisis and structural adjustment programs implemented as a response have been a major cause of extreme poverty and debt for developing nations. The 1960s and 70s involved a period of mania, termed by Kindleberger, where capital was in surplus and real interest rates were negative. The period involved loaning through loan pushing, where international banks and lending agencies encouraged Latin American countries to take out huge unnecessary loans. Loans were encouraged to be used for industrialisation, in particular for infrastructure programs. Borrowers were told that real interest rates were negative and that they would pay less on money that they took out. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, oil prices quadrupled, causing nations to borrow more money to support oil costs. By August 1982, Mexico could not repay their $60 billion debt, leading to a worldwide debt crisis. The Central African Republic was one of these countries in extreme debt, with a $25 million debt in 1984, increasing to $38 million in 1985. The World Bank and International Monetary Fund offered a solution to indebted nations in the form of structural adjustment programs. In order to receive these loans, countries had to accept conditionalities, which were neoliberal policies. Conditionalities include the privatisation of state-owned industries, removal of subsidies and social programs, fixed austerity through reducing government spending on hospitals, schools, public health and increasing tax collections, reducing barriers and deregulating trade. The structural adjustment programs have led to an increased competition between countries to export cheaper commodities, which favours consumers in the West due to open economies and export-led growth. Indebted nations have to work harder to produce more goods to sell to external nations at a cheap price to keep a stable economy, to pay off debt and to earn foreign exchange. The lack of wealth and the less circulation of money within the new indebted nation means that growth in the economy cannot be stimulated internally. Free trade is not occurring. Many indebted nations produce unfinished raw materials and do not have the capacity to process it, making the importation of finished goods very expensive. Many developing nations only export one or a few resources, which, if there is a collapse in the market, stops income coming in, which adds to their vulnerability. The state is unable to control trade policy and raise tariffs to give farmers protection against artificially cheap imports. For example, farmers in Ghana, livelihoods of tomato farming has been destroyed due to cheap importation of tomato sauce from Europe. This is the same with the livelihood of poultry farmers in Africa, the Caribbean and Asia, which has also been destroyed due to cheap importation of chicken parts. The importers' products' prices are artificially low due to subsidies in their own countries. The welfare and well-being of the population has declined as a result of structural adjustment programs. Lack of state ownership and management over social welfare systems has caused a decrease in money spent on healthcare and education systems. The state is unable to increase money spent on preventing diseases such as HIV and AIDS. And the removal of subsidies means that local people don't have access to education and healthcare services. For example, in 1998, $8.6 billion in Africa was spent on repaying debt, double the amount spent on education. Lack of education has detrimental effects. There is a lack of knowledge relating to safe sex, hygiene and healthcare, which has contributed to the spread of sexually transmitted infections, high birth rates and infant mortality and lower life expectancies. An underqualified nation also struggles to progress and compete with existing nations. Women have also been harshly impacted on. As women are already disproportionately poorer than men, privatisation has caused a loss of jobs for many women. In Mexico, between 1982 and 1992, 13% of women in community, social and personal sectors lost their jobs as jobs were given to external employees. Throughout the 1990s, criticism of structural adjustment programs emerged because stable growth and poverty reduction was not occurring. The World Bank and IMF responded that it was the fault of the country not following the guidelines of the policies who were at fault. In response to these criticisms, the World Bank developed the concept of good governance and argued that the deteriorating quality of the country, rent-seeking and weak legal systems were the cause of poverty, not liberalisation of the market. They cancelled debt under the Heavily Indebted Poor Countries Initiative in 1996, but it was not effective. Rolling over loans was also not effective because countries borrowed more money to repay off their old debts. In 1999, all developing countries borrowed $246 billion and returned $214 billion to creditors as loan repayments. Joseph Stiglitz, former chief economist at the World Bank, critically states that the World Bank implements identical policies within each country that do not meet the country's needs. He argued that the World Bank and International Monetary Fund protect their own needs while forcing open markets of impoverished countries, that they sell cheaper products in poor countries, undermine local producers, and provide aid to corrupt leaders who use loans for their own benefit, while the economy is being destroyed. Throughout this presentation, I've highlighted how much of a negative impact structural adjustment programs have had on nations that were impacted by the 1980s debt crisis. The World Bank and IMF have been a major cause of developing nations' debt. They have not eased the burden, which has contributed to serious impacts on education, health, women, and the overall financial system of impoverished developing nations.